Those of you who frequent this channel, hi, my name is Brett Kingman, will probably be aware that I'm a big fan of the Marshall SV20H, which is a fairly recent release from Marshall Amplification in the UK of their Super Lead Plexi 1959, but this is a 20-watt version, so it's in here and on stage, it's far more manageable, although I've got to say that 20 watts through a speaker cabinet is blisteringly loud, but it's still the sound. It's got the raucous classic Marshall sound that I grew up with and that I still love, so it's a benchmark for me in the real world and in the virtual world, which is why we're here today, because I thought, wouldn't it be fun if I could actually compare the real one, just dial everything up at noon here, to the modelled one in the Fractal Audio XFX3 firmware, and this goes right throughout their range for the FM3 and the FM9 as well. Just dial up everything at noon on the real version and the virtual version, and then feed them both through a common IR block, which in this case is, you're seeing it on the screen, the 4x12 Friedman Vintage 30 and the 4x12 Friedman Greenback. It's a mixture of both with a 57 on the V30s and SM7, I think it is, on the Greenback. And it was a difficult thing to kind of plan out, but the XFX is a very clever machine and it allows me to do that. So what we've got here is a Fender Ultralux Vintage 60s Stratocaster, HSS. It's got a Tim Shaw Haymaker humbucker in the back, which is a killer, and it is going to what is now a common input for the real world Marshall over here and my virtual Marshall. So it's seeing input 1 of the XFX. I'm explaining this for all the nerds and naysayers out there, just so you know what the signal path actually is as clean as I could make it. So input 1, which is our guitar, is seeing a tube screamer block here, which we'll introduce later on. It's being splintered off to output 4, and output 4 of the XFX is feeding this guy here, input of the real SV20H, which, as you can see, is jumped and all of the controls are at noon. Input 2 is the X load, because the Marshall is feeding the X load. It needs a speaker output to a reactive load box. And then it's coming to a little volume pad here, and I've dropped it down to 7 to maintain a volume parity between the modelled amp, which is what we're looking at here, and the real one. So both of those different signal paths, one's going directly to the model amp, the other one's going to the real Marshall, are being met here by this multiplex. And the multiplex lets me decide between the XFX3 in scene 1 or the real model in row 2, which is, so you've got row 2 up here and back here in scene 1, which is the XFX row 3. Very clever little device that is, and it's feeding the common IR block, which I've already said is the 2 Friedmans. There's a delay block afterwards as well. But what it lets me do is switch instantaneously using a common input between the model and the real amp, and the resemblance between the two is absolutely astounding in dynamics and tone as well. But there are some subtle differences, and I don't know whether they are attributed to things like speaker impedance curves and that sort of thing, but really it's, without getting ultra clinical about it, it is unbelievably close, especially with everything dialed at noon. So keep an eye on this scene title screen up here, because it'll tell you what's real. For instance, it's on scene 1 at the moment, which is the XFX model of our SV20H, which sounds like this. If I switch to scene 2, it goes to the real amp, which is this guy here. So I'm going to switch very quickly between them and try to play the same riff with the same physical dynamics of my arms and hands, just so you can hear, well, how close they are, or try to pick out the differences. And, I realise there are limitations with YouTube's compression and all that sort of stuff, but this is about as good as I can make it today with a 4K video in decent audio quality. So here we go. So we'll start with the real Marshall. right? That was pretty good. Very close. Now close your eyes, I'll do it again. I'll start with the real one. Pretty darn close, isn't it? I think so. Let's go to the bridge, the neck pickup where, you know, real kind of bluesy dynamics happen. And again, we'll start with the real amp. Real. All right, what about real-world dynamics? Because on stage, I don't know about you guys, but I use the volume knob on this guitar a lot to kind of clean things up, especially if I'm using a super lead plexi model, which I do. So I'm going to go down to about 4 on this guitar. That's the HSS model. And the neck pickup. Straight away I can tell that the HSS model is a bit more full-bodied in the bottom end, particularly when I've got the volume wound down. So is that a good thing or a bad thing? I don't know. It sounds pretty darn good in here. Let's try some dial manipulation. So let's turn the presence down on the model all the way off. And let's turn the presence down on the real thing all the way off. I'm going to go back to the bridge humbucker, volume flat out. We'll start with the real machine. Pretty darn close. I'm going to put these guys, put both of them back to noon. And now I'm going to bump the treble and the normal volumes up to about 2 o'clock. It doesn't actually have clock dials here, but that's as close as I can get it. I'll do the same here. So it's going to be a little bit hotter. It's unbelievably close in here. I don't know what it sounds like to you, but it's really close. All right, let's introduce scenes 3 and scenes 4. Now, what these do is, scene 3 is basically a copy of scene 1, which is the HSS model, and it introduces the tube screamer here with the controls as you see on your screen, and a stereo bucket brigade delay. So it sounds like this. And then I've got scene 4 that you can see indicated up here, which does the same thing, but with the real world model, which is what you see on your screen. So I'm going to flip between them. So if that doesn't convince you that, you know, the Fractal Audio firmware modelling is just unbelievably close to the real thing, then I'm not sure what will. But for me, it's pretty darn amazing. That's all. I could get a lot deeper with this, with, you know, different dials and all that sort of stuff. And of course, there's in the Fractal firmware, I can get right in and alter all of these different parameters. You know, roughly 200, maybe 200 odd different parameters I can get in and muck around with the amp components. But I'm just going to leave it as standard because that's the way it was modelled, and it just sounds unbelievable. I'll go back to without any effects. So here it is, the real amp again. What can I say? See ya.